So welcome back to another Audiopocalypse Mini-Set card review. Just in case you missed my last video, I made a pretty big announcement. I'll recap here. I'm a dad. I had a baby this week. I got a new daughter. Go watch the last video if you want to see some more pictures, and here's some additional details on all of that. Did a pretty big life and channel update on that last video. But for now, we're going to talk about some new mini set cards, not some new babies. Kicking it off here with dual class cards for Paladin and Shaman. Starting off with the Jukebox Totem, a new 2-mana 0/4 mech and totem. At the end of your turn, summon a 1/1 Silver Hand Recruit. So some potential recruit synergies here, but also obviously some big totem synergies, which in particular Totem Shaman right now, actually really good deck, still kind of high tier 2 in the meta right now. And I like this one for Totem Shaman. I think it's relevant across a couple cases. Number one, it has a high health total, which can be great to build on. If this sticks around and starts summoning 1/1s over time, could really whittle away at the opponent's health total, trades on board. Bodies left behind for Bloodlust as a finisher can be really relevant as well. On top of that, we've got Anchored Totem that's also in Totem Shaman, which buffs any 1-cost minions that get summoned. This summons 1-cost minions that get buffed by Anchored Totem, so that could be another nice little cross synergy there as well. I do feel like this card, as far as I can tell, would slot pretty nicely into Totem Shaman, which probably makes it immediately meta relevant. As far as Paladin is concerned, we don't have as much Silverhand Recruit stuff going around these days, but that's always an angle to consider. I don't think just as a regular old mech or regular old minion this makes the cut. I think it needs some kind of specific synergy to be relevant in Paladin decks right now, but definitely something to keep an eye on there in Paladin too. But for now, I think really a Totem Shaman card first and foremost, and looks like a pretty solid one. Next up is the Horn of the Windlord. The Windlord is my nickname at Taco Bell, and I'm happy to have a card named after me. It's a 6-mana 3/4 Paladin and Shaman again. It's got Wind Fury, and whenever your hero attacks a minion, set its stats to 3/3. So a couple different potential angles for this card. It is kind of just a 6-mana deal 12, which I probably wouldn't sleep on it in that regard. I don't think most cards are going to get run specifically for that reason, but man, that's not a bad backup plan sometimes to just dome the opponent for 12 over a couple turns. That can be pretty relevant, especially I would say in Shaman sometimes. Any kind of weapon buff or attack buff there could scale that up even crazier. So that's always a consideration to make. Actually, Paladin has some good attack buffs these days too, don't they? With some of the Lich King cards. So maybe that's even a consideration in Paladin as well. They have some attack buffs with like 4 Quel'Thalas to give your hero +2 attack. That could be 10 damage with Horn of the Windlord. So considerations in both those cases, but also if you wanted to, you could use Horn of the Windlord here as a removal card instead. It's going to set a minion that you attack to 3/3 so that you're able to clear it up without really taking too much damage. So sometimes in the mid game, if the opponent starts dropping big stuff, you know, whittle it away, some life total, or just trade into that big thing and clear it up. So maybe, you know, 1 to face, 1 to minion, and you're a happy camper, which is intriguing. This card's kind of got that like weird little promise. It wouldn't surprise me if it snuck into a deck here and there, basically. And then also for Paladin, we've got Dance Floor, a new location. It is 2 mana and 2 durability, and this one will give your minions Rush, which that's pretty crazy. In Pure Paladin right now in particular, I know sometimes it can be really hard to get back on board in Pure Paladin once you fall behind. You know, because you're just like playing a bunch of Divine Shield minions or whatever, and the opponent's either ignoring them or just cleaning them up too easily because you're not getting to dictate trades or have any initiative there. So a card like Dance Floor could really help. Currently they have Blood Matriarch Liadrin, which can do a similar sort of thing, but that's like a one-off. It doesn't always work super well from the damage requirements or the attack requirements she has. Dance Floor might be a more universal way to help you achieve that, so that you can use your minions to more reliably take trades into the board with Divine Shields, which is cool. Now, I will say, you know, these sort of proactive, aggressive decks that are getting minions down and looking for initiative probably aren't going to be super excited to spend 2 mana on a location that's not developing the board. So I don't know what time you're playing this and excited to do it. The great thing about Liadrin is she's still development. She's still threat in her own right. So if you play her alongside stuff, you don't feel too bad. And she's adding some stickiness there with the Divine Shield she gives you as well. So it's like she has that bonus. This doesn't really do that. And it's like, am I playing this like on turn 5 with a 3-drop to pull things back? When am I playing this and I'm excited about it? I don't know if that happens in Pure Paladin. So then I ask myself, well, who actually does use this? If it's not being played in an aggressive deck like that, Is it like in a Deathrattle deck? Is it something Paladin cares about? Maybe eventually, somewhere down the road, that could be kind of cool. Is it played in like Kangor? Maybe it's played in Kangor, right? So you could trade your Kangor in immediately, or a minion summoned off Kangor, get some of that lifesteal. That could be a possibility for Dance Floor. Ultimately, this affects the entire board of stuff you have. It has some potential, so I like this card okay. I don't see a line for it in Pure Paladin right away, or maybe ever, but Big Paladin, perhaps an enabler there. Certainly a possibility, if not like a guarantee. So next up, we have the Yelling Yodeler, a new 4-mana 3/4 undead battlecry. Trigger a friendly minion's Deathrattle twice, and this is a dual class card for Hunter and Death Knight, and as we'll see later in the review, Death Knight's also going to be paired with Paladin. Now that we have an odd number of classes, I guess they had to give somebody 2 classes, so that's Death Knight as the new kid on the block. As for the Yelling Yodeler here, I mean, that's a really big battlecry effect. We've seen this trigger a minion's Deathrattle effect numerous times throughout Hearthstone's history. I think this is the first time we've seen it do it twice. If you remember, Princess Uhuron back in the day was a legendary that did it once, and now this is a much cheaper regular card that does it twice. And of course, both Hunter and Death Knight have some Deathrattle synergies to consider there, particularly Death Knight's getting all of these kind of like big new Deathrattle things. We've got Cage Head, for instance, at the really high cost spot, which sometimes with 4 cost cards doesn't make a lot of sense in a single turn, but there are some setups with like Bone Shredder and stuff that might be possible in Cage Head decks. I still think, frankly, that's going to come along too late to be good. You got to like get a Cage Head down and then do all these follow-up turns later. We're talking about turns 10 later, or turns 8, 9, 10 or later, really, to make all of these sorts of things start happening, which probably a little bit too late for that kind of combo to really be as impactful as necessary. So is this better in a tempo world where you play an egg on 3 and then use the Yelling Yodeler on 4? I actually really like it in that scenario. I think any good 2 or 3 cost Deathrattle into the Yodeler could actually be really nice. And you got like Bone Shredder on 5 for Death Knights. Then Hunter has historically played into various different Deathrattle angles as well. So all it'll take is one really good 3 cost that has some stickiness like an egg, some kind of high friction thing like that, and the Yelling Yodeler making you like 2 5/5s or 2 4/4s or something as a result of that. That's a really powerful play. So I don't know if that exists right now in standard format. This is one of those cards I don't necessarily see carving out space at the moment based on the way these decks are playing currently. But this card has a lot of latent potential, I would say, because this effect is just so big. Doing a big Deathrattle twice at only 4 costs, that's a really efficient sort of play, and it doesn't take much to unlock the potential of this ability. So I would say store this one away for some high power plays down the road somewhere. So next up here we have Hidden Meaning, a new 2-mana secret for Hunter. Of course, 2 mana when your opponent ends their turn with no mana, as if they triggered a finale. Summon a random 3-cost minion, and you know, I would say the average 3-cost minion is probably about a 3/3, as you might expect, which is a little overstated for a 2-mana play. But of course, random minions aren't great in Hearthstone, and just 3/3 stats aren't great even for 2 mana these days. We like synergies, we like specific effects, we like game plans, and just a slightly above average body on board is not going to feel like a great reward for 2 mana. Not to mention there's some consistency issues there. Sometimes you're going to get like 1 attack garbage that was all about its battle cry that you don't even get to utilize. So sometimes it's going to low roll pretty hard for you, and very rarely will it high roll into something awesome. But there is a different upside to this card, which is that your opponent has 0 opportunity to interact with the minion that summons. Because it is happening at the end of their turn, there is no way for them to deal with or kill that minion. So it's going to get to attack. It'll go face if you want. It can take a trade if you want. It's going to stick around and be relevant for you. So, you know, if you had like buff cards to follow it up or something, you could help yourself guarantee a minion there. So you've got this downside of, you know, pretty weak summon, unreliable and inconsistent in its stat play, but also some upside of the consistency of its ability to attack. So is that going to be worth that trade-off or not? The other downside here, of course, is that it may not get summoned. Sometimes your opponent's just going to float energy, and then you're sitting on a secret that's not really very disruptive or interactive at all. It's one of those that just kind of happens or it doesn't, and it's not really messing with the opponent's game plan or decisions all that much. Yes, occasionally people might decide to float a mana because they're like, oh, whatever, man, I don't want you to get at this minion. But most of them, they won't care because it's a random minion. A random 3-drop board is not so scary that they can't spend all their mana. So I think the lack of disruption, when you think about like classic amazing secrets, you know, explosive traps, and freezing traps. Those did awesome big things. They were really frustrating for the opponents, really limited their plays, really changed their decision making, and had great payoffs. I just don't see that for Hidden Meaning. I think this payoff is mediocre at best and very much non-disruptive for the opponent, which for secrets, I think is kind of a recipe for this to not work all that well. Random stats aren't worth it. Disruption isn't good. I don't think this gets played much. So moving on here, we have another dual class for Hunter and Death Knight. It's the Hollow Hound, a 6-mana 3/6 undead beast with lifesteal and rush and a cleave effect here. This damages minions next to whomever it attacks. So perfect scenario here. Your opponent has 3 3/3s on board. The Hollow Hound clears their board and heals you for 9. And that's actually pretty amazing. That's going to be a great feeling play, I think. Even at 6 mana, you know, take a board swing, heal up a bunch. That's going to feel like an awesome stabilizer. We know too that Death Knight values lifesteal and healing. There are some synergies there in slower blood Death Knights, and this certainly with non-types is available to them. And then in Hunter, of course, we have bigger beast packages as well that can sometimes help you cheat this into play or utilize these big beasts to resummon them later. So there are definitely some directions for the Hollow Hound here in both of those classes, and that does make this a pretty cool fusing. Also of note is that it's some lifesteal for Hunter, which they don't always have great access to healing or even really sometimes board swings like this. So this could open up a utility line for Hunter that's not otherwise accessible. In a lot of ways, this card reminds me of the old Blade Master Samuro plus Apotheosis combo we would see in Priest, where that would just heal a bunch and clear a board. I will say, though, that this does feel notably weaker than that combo. It is nice that it's bundled into one card, so you don't have to play 2 cards from hand to achieve it, but also it's only ever hitting 3 minions, and sometimes that might not quite be enough. Things can sometimes get really wide in Hearthstone these days, and that might be a limiter here for the Hollow Hound. Also, technically, the fact that it's adjacent minions can be an issue too. There's like a taunt on the end. You might only be able to hit 2 things. So there are some limiters here in comparison to other cards that have done similar sorts of things. Samuro had a limiter too, technically, with his Frenzy, so maybe that's a notable downside. But also, I don't know. Basically, I'm saying this looks good-ish to me. I'm like, yeah, I see some lines, but I'm also hesitating a little bit because I don't know that it has as much like scalability across the width of the board. Maybe a little bit harder to scale up from a height standpoint too. You know, it was easy for Priests to make those Samuros even bigger back in the days. Like, might be harder for classes to make this a little bit bigger. So ultimately, I'm proceeding with some caution and hesitation about this card. I do think it does something cool. It has potential. It's very swingy, but I don't think this is going to be like a home run sort of play that either or both of these classes are utilizing all that regularly. It feels a little bit more niche. So next up here, we have Cold Feet, dual class for Death Knight and Paladin, the other side of the Death Knight dual class. 2-mana frost spell. Enemy minions cost 5 more next turn. So this has Rebuke vibes. If you remember that card from long ago, that would make enemy spells cost 5 more next turn. It was also a 2-mana spell. But with minions here, this is potentially even crazier. So many decks, basically every deck, is reliant in one way or another on awesome big minion sorts of plays, and this is just going to shut people out, honestly. There are going to be entire decks where their turns are just killed. I mean, just playing this on turn 2 or 3 sometimes could just buy you an entire turn of time to stabilize, to slow down an aggressive deck while you're setting up for your big Kangor Paladin or blood DK stabilization board clears later, just basically stalling people into a dominant late game where you think you're favored. But then on the other side of things too, if you're playing like, some kind of combo deck and you're worried about like a Lady's Thinno pop off or something, Cold Feet could also just delay that, just make the Lady's Thinno cost a ton of mana, so it's harder for them to follow that up or make plays alongside it. So it's got this like early game disruption that just completely stalls people out. It's got this late game disruption to buy you time or disrupt combos while you're killing your opponent perhaps, which to me makes this look really, really good. It's coming at such a low overhead as well at 2 mana. I just think this card's going to have to get played in one way or another. I will say, it's true that so many decks do value their own game plans and care less about messing with the opponent and care more about enacting and achieving their own win conditions or game lines or whatever it might be. So sometimes cards like this kind of fall through the cracks because it's like, well, who cares? I'm not going to worry about Cold Feet. I'm doing my own thing. So there will still be decks that do that. Pure Paladin won't necessarily need to run Cold Feet or anything if they're just winning with aggression on board. But anytime the game slows down a little bit and a deck plays a little bit more reactively at all, you have to imagine Cold Feet's a card they consider. And Paladin and Death Knight have both historically been able to do that, particularly Blood Death Knights lately can play very slow. So I think Cold Feet's a card that's going to get some play. This just feels crazy strong as far as disruption is concerned. And frankly, I don't like this design. I think it's going to feel awful to play against this. You're just going to miss entire turns, basically, where you did nothing because of a single 2-mana card. Also, just this getting discovered off, various discover effects and nogglings and stuff. Could be 4 or 5 of these played the game. That's going to suck. So, not a fan of this design, and also I think it's just probably going to be really good. So moving on to the cool Ghoul here, a 4-mana 3/1 undead with Divine Shield and Reborn, and yeah, this is basically the stickiest of all sticky dudes. This minion's going to feel impossibly difficult to deal with for some decks because you're going to have to trade in basically 4 things to deal with the cool Ghoul, which is particularly in spaces like Arena seems completely insane to me. As someone who never plays Arena from a casual perspective, I can imagine that being nuts. Now, in Standard, I'm a little bit more torn on this card. I think a lot of people are going to instantly say this is a great Standard card. It's just so sticky and so hard to deal with, which is true, but I do worry about the pressure that this card enables. When we look at the 4-cost spot in both Paladin and Death Knight these days, with Unholy DK as the kind of aggressive Death Knight and Pure Paladin as well, we see cards that are prioritizing wider board damage output as opposed to single unit stickiness. In other words, like, okay, yeah, this is going to stick around a while. It's going to be hitting the opponent for maybe 2 or 3 turns because they can't deal with it very effectively, which that's cool, but it's not really putting out that much pressure or damage because it's only hitting for 3 per attack, and over 3 turns, it just takes a while for that damage to sort of stack up. Whereas if you compare that to something like Buffet Biggin, for instance, that Paladin might utilize instead, this is an instant 3 minions, right? That are just as annoying and sticky as the cool Ghoul because you got a couple 3/1 Divine Shields to go with it, and it presents 8 immediate damage that if the opponent doesn't deal with that right away, they're going to take 8 to the face, or maybe they deal with part of it and they take 5 to the face, as opposed to just this 3 repeating. In other words, this doesn't create quite the clock or pressure that other cards might. And then even if you look at Death Knight, a common 4-cost is Nerubian Swarm Guard, which, okay, you say, well, Regis, that's only 3 damage. You're right, but what is the most common finisher and follow-up to these sorts of plays in the mid-game? It's Grave Rune, or Grave Strength. I always call this Grave Runes. Grave Strength, which utilizes these wide boards again to create tons of pressure and damage. In other words, the cool Ghoul just doesn't scale up to be as threatening or game-ending as a lot of other of these like mid-game board kind of reloads or follow-up cards that we see right now. So I don't know that this has the right alignment. This kind of encourages a slower, grindier kind of play as opposed to a more aggressive kind of play. Now, that said, do slower and grindier decks value the cool Ghoul enough? I don't really think they do. I think it's aligned in a weird way with aggro, but just not satisfying the needs of an aggressive deck. So I think this is actually going to fall through the cracks a little in Standard. This kind of lives in a gap where I'm not sure who actually needs this one, which is a weird thing to say because clearly, like, from a, in a vacuum, from a raw standpoint, from a raw numbers situation, this card is doing a lot for 4 mana. I just don't know that it really meets anyone's needs, which is kind of crazy to think about. And then finally for Death Knight here, we have Dead Air, do 2-mana spell. It's Frost and Unholy typed, and it will destroy your undead, and then it will re-summon them. So this is kind of like the card Unholy Frenzy that forces all of your minions to attack something, and then it re-summons any that die, which can be great for activating Deathrattles and giving you corpses and stuff. But that one does require that those units have something to trade into. If the opponent's board is empty, you can't really do anything with Unholy Frenzy, which can definitely limit it. With Dead Air here, you can still generate corpses and you can still activate Deathrattles without requiring your opponent to have something to trade into. One important distinction, though, is that this is only undead. So this is limited a little bit to a specific minion type, which might matter. There could definitely be Deathrattles later down the road that don't feel quite as good to utilize here. Now, we've seen a lot of this like Deathrattle stuff coming together in Death Knight, and so far it hasn't really come together, I guess we should say. We've seen it try to come together, right? So there's been like the big cage head plays, a lot of these little Bone Shredder Deathrattle synergies. We've already talked about one card previously. So is this going to suddenly make the difference? Do we achieve a critical mass where Deathrattles make sense? I mean, obviously one consideration is that Cagehead is an 8-mana card, and Dead Air is a 2-mana card. So like on turn 10, you could just straight up kill your Cage Head and, you know, summon that Blight Boar and then get another Cage Head for later to kind of set up. And then you can Bone Shredder plus Yodeler, and, you know, you've got yourself a little thing cooking. I maintain, as I said with the Yodeler, I think this is coming online too late for all these cards. It's like a OTK that's not really all that game ending, and maybe really more like a 2 or 3 turn kill setup to actually make all of that relevant. So I have some considerations and concerns there about how quickly this comes online. Obviously, you know, with Deathrattle synergies, it's just about what Deathrattles are to summon. They're good egg cards. All of this could come together. Use this to kill off an egg, get a 5/5. That feels pretty good for 2 mana and sets you up for later. So I think this card definitely has a chance. It does a big thing. Corpses are awesome. Undead is a limiter I'm concerned about, though, and just where this fits into the Death Knight package, still a lot of considerations there as well. So ultimately, hesitantly hopeful for this card, but definitely not sold quite yet. Jukebox Totem is a 4-star card. Horn of the Windlord is a 3-star card. Dance Floor is a 3-star card. Yelling Yodeler is a 4-star card. Hidden Meaning is a 2-star card. Hollow Hound is a 3-star card. Cold Feet is a 4-star card. Cool Ghoul is a 2-star card. And there you go, folks. It wraps it up for this particular review. Pretty crazy dual class combinations here. Paladin and Shaman I didn't expect, but I like it. Curious to hear your thoughts on all these cards. We got a couple more days worth of reviews coming, I think, so stay tuned for more cards in the near future. Again, check that last video if you're curious about some life and channel update stuff. Thanks for watching, and until next time, game on.